I returned from Dad's funeral to find my grandfather's 60-year-old cabin demolished for an HOA lake path. The president smugly explained they'd bought the land from the county. Then I showed her the deed. I own 300 feet of shoreline including their $2.3 million clubhouse. Demolition started immediately. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. I came home from my father's funeral to find my grandfather's cabin reduced to a pile of rubble and a woman in a hard hat directing construction workers to clear the debris for the new community lake path. She had no idea she'd just destroyed the last piece of my family's heart on land I actually owned, including the shoreline her $1 million clubhouse was built on. The phone call came at 3 a.m. while I was sitting in my hotel room after burying my father. A neighbor's voice, shaky and upset, "Danny, you need to get home. They're tearing down your cabin." I drove through the night, my mind numb from grief and disbelief. The cabin had been in our family for 60 years. My grandfather built it with his own hands in 1963, the year I was born. Every summer of my childhood was spent on that small porch, learning to fish with Dad, listening to Grandpa's stories, feeling safe and loved in a world that often felt cold. When I pulled into what used to be my driveway, my heart stopped. The cabin was gone. Completely gone. Where my grandfather's dream had stood for 6 decades, there was nothing but broken wood, scattered memories, and a woman in an expensive business suit directing a bulldozer like she was conducting an orchestra of destruction. I sat in my truck for a full minute, staring at the emptiness where my childhood lived, where my father had proposed to my mother, where 3 generations of my family had celebrated every Christmas morning. Then I got out and walked toward the woman who had stolen my heart. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice hollow with grief and rage. "What have you done?" She turned around with the kind of bright, professional smile that wealthy people use when they're destroying poor people's lives. "Oh, you must be the previous occupant. I'm Sandra Whitfield, president of Lakeshore Estates HOA. We're so excited about our new community lake path project." "Previous occupant?" I repeated, looking at the pile of rubble that used to be my sanctuary. "This was my family's cabin." "Was being the operative word," Sandra replied cheerfully. "The county condemned this structure as abandoned property, and we've purchased the land for community improvement. This area will be a beautiful walking path with lake access for all our residents." I stared at this woman who was talking about my demolished family heritage like it was a successful business transaction. Abandoned? I was here 3 weeks ago for my father's funeral planning. "Well, the legal notices were posted for 90 days with no response," Sandra said, pulling out official-looking documents. "County records showed no current owner, so the property reverted to public use. We've invested $200,000 in this lake path project." "No current owner?" My voice was getting dangerous. "Lady, my family has owned this land since 1963. Sandra's professional smile flickered slightly. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but the legal process was followed correctly. This land now belongs to Lakeshore Estates for community recreation." That's when I looked past the rubble of my cabin and saw something that made my grief transform into nuclear rage. The community lake path led directly to a massive clubhouse built right on the shoreline. The building was enormous, expensive, and sitting exactly where my grandfather used to launch his fishing boat. "Sandra, that clubhouse on the water, when was it built?" 2 years ago. "Isn't it beautiful? Cost us $2.3 million, but our residents deserve luxury amenities." I pulled out my phone and called the number I'd memorized after Dad's death, our family attorney who'd been handling estate documents. "Peterson Law Firm, this is Margaret." "Margaret, it's Danny Morrison. I need you to get to Lakeshore Drive immediately with all our property deeds. Someone demolished Grandpa's cabin and claims they own our land." "Danny, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't sign anything." After I hung up, Sandra was staring at me with the first hint of concern I'd seen. "Sir, there's no point calling lawyers. The legal process dash." "Sandra, before you tell me more about legal processes, let me ask you something. Do you know what riparian rights are?" Her confident expression cracked slightly. "I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. Riparian rights mean whoever owns the shoreline controls water access. Your clubhouse is built on waterfront property. Yes, we purchased waterfront access rights from the county." "From the county that doesn't own the shoreline?" Sandra's professional smile was completely gone now. "What do you mean?" "I mean my grandfather didn't just own the cabin lot. He owned 300 feet of shoreline, including the exact spot where your clubhouse is sitting." The color drained from Sandra's face. "That's impossible. We did title searches." "On the cabin lot?" Did you search the Shoreline property that was deeded separately? The silence that followed was beautiful and terrible. Sandra was starting to understand that her HOA had just destroyed my family's cabin to build a path to a clubhouse they'd built on land they didn't own. Margaret arrived with a file box thick enough to stop bullets. She took one look at the demolished cabin and her face went hard as stone. Danny, I'm so sorry. Who authorized this destruction? Sandra Whitfield, HOA president. She claims the county condemned our property as abandoned. Margaret pulled out the original property deeds and spread them on the hood of my truck. Ms. Whitfield, these documents show that the Morrison family owns not just the cabin lot, but 300 feet of prime shoreline including water rights and lake access. Sandra stared at the deeds like they were written in a foreign language. But the county said dash. The county made a mistake, Margaret interrupted. They condemned the cabin lot without researching the connected shoreline property. Your clubhouse is built on private land. This can't be right, Sandra whispered. It gets worse, Margaret continued, pulling out more documents. The Morrison family also owns mineral rights, timber rights, and exclusive fishing access to this entire section of lake. Your residents have been trespassing for 2 years. I looked at the demolished remains of my grandfather's cabin, then at the $2.3 million clubhouse built on my shoreline, then at Sandra, who was starting to shake. Sandra, you didn't just tear down my cabin. You built your clubhouse on my land without permission. But we paid the county dash. For land they didn't own, Margaret said. The county owes you a refund, and you owe Mr. Morrison compensation for 2 years of illegal use plus the destruction of his family's cabin. Sandra pulled out her phone with trembling hands. I need to call our lawyers. Call them, I said, looking at the rubble where my childhood lived. Tell them they need to explain how a $2.3 million clubhouse ended up on private property. The lawyers arrived within an hour, 3 of them in expensive suits, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The lead attorney examined Margaret's documents and his face went pale. Ms. Whitfield, we have a serious problem. The Morrison family owns this entire shoreline. Fix it, Sandra demanded. Buy the land, relocate the clubhouse, whatever it costs. Ma'am, you can't relocate a $2.3 million building. And Mr. Morrison doesn't have to sell his family's land. That's when I made the announcement that would destroy Sandra's world. I'm not selling. I'm evicting. Evicting? Sandra repeated weakly. Your clubhouse is on my property without permission. That's trespassing. You have 30 days to remove it. You can't tear down a $2.3 million building, Sandra protested. Watch me, I replied, looking at the pile of debris that used to be my heart. You had no problem tearing down my family's cabin. Margaret smiled grimly. Mr. Morrison, as property owner, you have the right to remove unauthorized structures from your land. Sandra's lawyer stepped forward desperately. Mr. Morrison, perhaps we can reach an agreement. Lakeshore Estates is prepared to offer substantial compensation. How substantial? $1 million for perpetual use rights to the clubhouse location. I looked at the destroyed cabin where my father had taught me to tie fishing knots, where my grandfather had told me stories about the old days, where I'd planned to bring my own children someday. Sandra, you destroyed something worth more than money. No deal. $2 million, Sandra said frantically. No deal. $5 million. That's more than the clubhouse cost to build. Sandra, you don't understand. This isn't about money. This is about what you stole from my family. That's when Margaret pulled out the document that would end Sandra's world. Mr. Morrison, your grandfather's will includes a specific provision about the family cabin. He wanted it preserved as a Morrison family heritage site in perpetuity. I took the will with hands that were shaking from grief and rage. There it was in Grandpa's careful handwriting. The cabin shall remain Morrison family property forever, as a place where future generations can connect with their heritage and find peace by the water. Sandra had destroyed my grandfather's final wish for a walking path. Margaret, what are my legal options? Criminal trespassing charges against the HOA for unauthorized construction. Civil damages for destruction of family property. Immediate removal of the clubhouse for trespassing. And criminal fraud charges against whoever filed false documents claiming county ownership. Sandra was crying now, mascara running down her face as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Please, Mr. Morrison. 60 families paid premium prices for homes with clubhouse access. If you destroy the clubhouse, you'll ruin their property values. Like you ruined my family's heritage? It was a mistake. We didn't know dash. You didn't care to know. You saw something that belonged to someone else and you took it. The demolition of the clubhouse began 3 weeks later. I stood in the same spot where Sandra had directed the destruction of my cabin, watching bulldozers tear down her $2.3 million monument to theft and entitlement. The Lakeshore Estates residents were furious. They'd bought expensive homes specifically for clubhouse access, and now their premium amenity was becoming rubble. Property values dropped immediately when buyers learned the community had been built on illegally used land. Sandra was removed as HOA president by emergency vote. The residents discovered she'd been taking kickbacks from contractors and had never properly researched property rights before approving the clubhouse construction. But the real justice came when I announced my plans for the Shoreline. I'm rebuilding my grandfather's cabin exactly as it was, using the original blueprints and materials. The Shoreline will be restored to natural habitat, and the area will be designated as Morrison Family Heritage Preserve, protected from future development forever. The new cabin was completed 6 months later. Every board, every nail, every detail was exactly as my grandfather had built it in 1963. But now it was protected by legal designation and the knowledge that I controlled 300 feet of shoreline that no HOA could ever touch. I was sitting on the rebuilt porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over water that belonged to my family, when my phone rang with a call from Sandra. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm truly sorry for what I did to your cabin." "Thank you, Sandra. How are you doing?" "Not well. The legal fees bankrupted me. I had to sell my house and move to an apartment. The criminal charges are still pending." "I'm sorry to hear that. Mr. Morrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you're sitting in your rebuilt cabin looking at where our clubhouse used to be, do you feel like justice was served?" I thought about that question while watching the morning light paint the water gold. My grandfather's cabin was home again. The shoreline was protected forever. But the hole in my heart from losing the original cabin would never completely heal. "Sandra, justice would have been if you'd checked property rights before stealing my land. Justice would have been if my grandfather's cabin was still standing. What I got was compensation, not justice." After she hung up, I sat in the silence of early morning, surrounded by the peace my grandfather had built and Sandra had temporarily stolen. The new cabin was perfect, identical to the original, but it would never hold the same memories. Those memories had died in the rubble when Sandra chose convenience over compassion, profit over people, entitlement over empathy. But future generations of Morrison children would fish from this porch, learn family stories in these rooms, and understand that some things are worth fighting for no matter what they cost. The shoreline would remain Morrison land forever, protected by legal documents and the memory of what happens when wealthy people think they can steal poor families' hearts and call it community improvement. Sandra Whitfield had demolished my grandfather's cabin to build a path to a clubhouse on stolen land. Now her clubhouse was gone, her community was worthless, and my family's heritage was protected forever. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds its way home to where it belongs.